Hi everyone, welcome back to Bareall, your true crime podcast where we talk about chilling true crime stories and also we talk about scandalous true life stories that you may see, on the internet, Reddit, stuff like that. I am your host Emily and today we're going to talk about Dr. John Bodkin Adams, aka the Angel of Death. So this case is a little bit controversial as Dr. Adams was basically exonerated from the crimes. Now, I personally think that that's wrong based on circumstantial evidence. I know that in the courts, circumstantial evidence and stuff like that is not usually good enough to go on and convict someone, but we'll get into that. So, Dr. Adams was convicted of, I say convicted, he wasn't really convicted. He was accused of killing over 100 patients. No one knows really how many of his patients died under suspicious circumstances because we can't say that he killed them. We'll get into it. Basically, when these patients died, they tend to be older, vulnerable, lonely people. He was written into their wills. Somehow, he's received numerous Rolls Royce, money, houses, anything you can imagine that a lonely old person can be charmed and witted out of, he received in their wills when these people died. So we are going to look back, I think it's to the 50s. So Dr. Adams was born in 1899 in Ireland before moving to England to Eastbourne, where he eventually set up his medical practice after finishing all of his, doctor degrees, stuff like that, passing all the medical exams. So he set up his own practice in Eastbourne, and from there, things quickly started to spiral. To begin with, he was really well respected within the community. It's a seaside town. A lot of people say that older people tend to go to seaside towns to die. It's where they retire. It's where they go to be happy before they pass. So he was a well-respected doctor to begin with. Everyone loved him, he had charm and charisma, and obviously that's how he got his patients to he lured them in with that charm and charisma. So we don't actually know who the first victim of Dr. Adams was, but the first known, kind of dodgy case was Edith Morell. She suffered a severe stroke, she was in a lot of pain, her life was not that great. Because you bear in mind we're looking at this from the 1930s to the 1960s, and of this time, yes, there were medical advances, but you're still talking about the very early 1900s. So, practices aren't what they are now. So Edith was actually paralysed due to her stroke, and Dr. Adams would actually prescribe a cocktail of drugs. This included heroin, because that's what they would give back in those days for medication. But that heroin would also be mixed with morphine. Two very addictive drugs that are habitual. So the more you take them, the higher dose you need. So he would give her a concoction of these drugs. He would prescribe them to her for her pain. So Dr. Adams said that he prescribed these to Edith to ease the symptoms of her cerebral irritation. Cerebral irritation. Cerebral being the brain, so irritation of the brain. Like my granddad, bless him, had a bad stroke, and for him it wasn't cerebral irritation. It was, nerve pain, nerve damage. He was paralysed down one side. He was in a lot of pain, so I understand that. But to call it cerebral irritation, I don't know if it's very of that time to call it something like that, but I digress. So unfortunately, we don't actually know the stature of Edith Morell's will, but she died in 1949, and Dr. John Bodkin Adams did receive some items when she passed. Now, there's a lot of theories about the angel of death. Many say or have theorised that, the angel of death name comes about because these were people that were in extreme amounts of pain, they were dying, that kind of thing. And Dr. Adams had a kind of morbid curiosity with euthanasia. Anyone that worked with him knew that he had a morbid fascination with it. So people have theorised that he was giving these people cocktails of drugs and upping the doses, so on and so forth, to euthanize people. Hence the angel of death, because these people that were suffering were no longer suffering. Obviously, we don't know if these people asked him for help, if he did it off of his own back, we don't know. But either way, he was gaining something from a lot of these patients' deaths. He was gaining items, he was gaining money, he was gaining cars. From Edith, he received a Rolls Royce. Not only did he receive a Rolls Royce, he received a small, batch of valuable items like good silver cutlery, a small amount of money. People have said that this could be payment for him euthanizing them, basically. Which I can understand that theory. So it's either that, he was just twisted and he got this stuff out of these people, and to get that stuff sooner, he killed them before people realised that the patient's wills had been changed, or he was taking this stuff as payment for euthanasia, for euthanizing his patients, which, it's a very controversial topic to talk about. I know people who've had such a low quality of life, who are incredibly unwell, who wish that it was an option for them because, they are just waiting for death to come. So you can understand it and sympathise with it to an extent, but also the kind of sketchy nature of, the kind of sketchy nature of, Dr. Adams receiving these items and whatnot. There's still a moral of it, killing people. So essentially, he managed to convince people that Edith's death was of natural causes because of her stroke. She just succumbed to the illness. She'd been ill for a very long time. And, so people didn't really question it much. But the other patients had very similar stories to Edith's. Another alleged victim of Dr. Adams was Gertrude Hullett. Gertrude was another patient who became ill and became unconscious. So the story here is that basically Dr. Adams called out a pathologist. Pathologists are people that do post-mortems after people die. They investigate the cause of death. The only problem is Gertrude was not dead. So did he know something that no one else knew? Basically, when Francis Camp, the pathologist, received the body or went to investigate the body, she was still alive. Her heart was still beating, she was breathing, she was still alive. There was no doubt about it. The pathologist was absolutely furious and called Dr. Adams out about his incompetence. So Gertrude's cause of death was listed on the death certificate as brain hemorrhage. But it was found that she died through suicide of the ingestion of sleeping pills that were prescribed to her by Dr. Adams. The pathologist theorised that, this was no suicide. Dr. Adams had everything to do with this. It was written all over it. He theorised that basically he gave Gertrude the sleeping pills, and that he assumed that by the time the pathologist entered the scene, Gertrude would have passed. Which is a plausible kind of theory, really. So Dr. Adams' crimes actually came to light after Gertrude's daughter became suspicious of the whole situation. As you would. If the death certificate, is listed as brain hemorrhage, your mother wasn't actually dead, when she was taken to the pathologist, and the pathologist finds out that there was an ingestion of a toxic dose of sleeping pills, something's not adding up. It seems that Dr. Adams had a habit of giving patients lethal doses of a variety of drugs in order to kill them, allegedly kill them. Adams often claimed that a lot of these patients that were dying under his care were actually terminally ill people that, nature had just taken its course and the terminal illness had taken over. Which we know, there's coincidences. 1, 2, 3 maybe, but the amount of people that were dying under his care was way too suspicious for it to be a coincidence that he just had multiple terminal patients. So it actually turns out that Edith Morell, the kind of first known victim that I spoke about, she had a team of nurses caring for her 24 hours a day because she was paralysed from the stroke. She couldn't do things herself. She needed full-time care. These nurses came forward and testified. The nurses testified that Dr. Adams would give toxic injections, medications, lethal doses of medications to his patients. But they felt like they couldn't say anything or do anything. Bear in mind this is the 1940s and 1950s. Women were still meant to be, the homemaker. The whole women coming into the workplace was still a fairly new concept, and they felt like they couldn't overstep that boundary and go against the doctor of the medical practice, which I can understand. You're fearing for your livelihood that's paying your bills. I get that. Dr. Adams' defence basically cross-examined what these nurses were saying. Dr. Adams had workbooks, notebooks with basically all the medications he had administered and stuff. And the nurses had written in these books, seen them and stuff like that. They knew he was doing it. That wasn't the issue. The issue was they were scared to come forward. But apparently what the nurses were writing apparently contradicted what they were saying in court. We don't have any transcripts, we don't have copies of the notebooks, so we can't know for sure. But, the issue isn't that these medications weren't recorded. It's, he could be writing, giving X patient at this time with this illness 5 ml of morphine. But he could be administering, lethal amounts. No one's to know. It's his practice. He's going to be ordering the medications. No one's going to know. Paperwork can be doctored easily as well. There could be missing pages that they've then filled out after the fact. There's so many things that can be changed in paperwork. Back in those days as well, when it was just paperwork, like it wasn't logged on anything online because there was no online. Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, Dr. Adams was only convicted of one murder, and that was of Edith Morell, that first victim I spoke about that we knew about. There were hundreds, if not thousands, because we don't know how many patients he actually dealt with that died. He only got convicted of one murder. He was struck off the medical register and found guilty of forging prescriptions, which is what I was saying about that other paperwork. We don't know if, 5 ml was written down and he was given 30 ml. The forging of prescriptions could come in there. So he was convicted of forging prescriptions, the murder of Edith Morell, struck off the register, and then eventually acquitted of Edith's murder. His acquittal of the murder is still controversial to this day. Some even say that his work inspired Harold Shipman, which was a very similar situation, which I'll talk about in another video. He was a doctor, abused his power, people died, he benefited from it. Whatever happened, whether he was an angel of death and he was helping his patients by euthanizing them because that's what they wanted, and they paid him from the will when he died, or whether he did it off his own back because these people were just so ill and, you know, he was being merciful for killing them, which is what some people think, that he was just merciful to kill them because they were dying anyway, because he had that morbid fascination with euthanasia. You know, it's such a controversial topic that no one talks about. You know, in this country, in England, euthanizing someone is not a thing. You know, you can go, I think it's to Switzerland, and stuff like that to have it done, but it's illegal here. So it's the whole moral of the story as well. You know, the circumstantial evidence that, you know, he was lying on death certificates. You know, he was clearly injecting toxic doses of these drugs, killing people and lying about it, which, you know, the fraudulent prescriptions he got arrested for and stuff like that. It makes you wonder really who you're dealing with. I guess the 1940s and 1950s seems such a long time ago, and medicine moves in leaps and bounds, that it's hard to think that someone could do this. You know, you get doctors that, I don't know, have awful bedside manner, but everything is monitored so intensely that no one would be able to do this nowadays, surely. But anyway, what do you guys think? Do you think he was genuinely guilty? Because personally, I do. I think there's too much evidence there. Dr. Adams was clearly administering these toxic cocktails of drugs. You know, he got done for doing fraudulent prescriptions. So, like I said, how do we know what doses were real in the notebook that he had? We don't. And even more so, poor Gertrude, who was still alive when the pathologist was sent for, and the contradicting death certificate that said brain hemorrhage when it was sleeping drugs. You know, the doctor wouldn't have known. You know, if she had taken sleeping drugs, doctor wouldn't have known that it would have been sleeping drugs. You know, all that testing was done after the fact. But just to put brain hemorrhage and assume brain hemorrhage and be that incompetent that you call the pathologist when she's still alive, it makes you wonder what it was that made them acquit Dr. Adams of the murders. But anyway, that concludes this episode of Bare All. I hope you join me again next time when we talk about another true crime case or scandalous true life story.